let me see that all of her teeth were pulled, and then but I knew that her teeth were rotten out of her head, and then all of a sudden, probably 6 months later, she walked in my office just ear to ear grin and this whole new set of teeth, and from that point forward, she got a house, she got a job, she works for us at the Pollard. She's probably one of my best employees that I have at Volunteers of America.
That's amazing.
And it wasn't just recovery that did it, but it was that work that Community Health Alliance did upstairs.
Yeah.
That really was a catalyst for her to get back out in the world.
Partnerships are great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What's so people understand, like, I think we envision homelessness, like, because I really want to get into your own personal stories. We envision homelessness in whatever way we envision it, right? So frequently there's encampments, there's tarps and tents and cardboard boxes and that sort of thing. What is your guys' experience, and how is it similar or dissimilar from what you encounter more frequently in your lines of work?
My own experience compared to what I see at the shelters, obviously I was homeless for a majority of my addiction, but mine was all drug fueled. I wasn't employable. I never went to the shelters. I didn't go to the soup kitchens. I would always figure out some way of feeding myself or getting somewhere. I don't want to say a lot of nights were spent sleeping in my car and stuff like that, but a lot of nights were on friends' couches, other addicts who had homes.
Friends in air quotes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what I see at the shelters, and this is just my own personal opinion. So because if you ask, like, if you go look at any study, they're going to tell you that 50% of the homeless are mentally ill. And I just know from my own experience and what I see every single day is, I'm going to say 99.9% of my clientele at the homeless shelter are mentally ill.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from my own experience, being homeless and not having a place to brush your teeth or to shower or to wake up to some nice clean clothes or in the dead of winter to a nice warm place to sleep in, there's got to be some form of mild depression going on. If it, there's got to be something going on with you. And so it depends on, I guess, what that study looks at is like, what do you consider mental health? But I know from my own experience, because I've suffered from depression and anxiety, that even in the mildest form of depression can on some days be debilitating. And so even if someone identifies at the shelters, I have mild depression, I honor that and respect that, and because I know what it's like personally. And so I'm going to say 99.9% of our folks living at the shelters are dealing with some sort of mental health depression, along with self-medicating on some sort of drug.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. My experience, mental health played a huge part in it. And you can find that with substances. I was definitely just on a roller coaster of life. Being able to even hold a job wasn't really in it for me. Like every 3 or 4 months, I would have a major drop down. And that kind of preluded to me getting on the streets. And I'm very closed off from the world when I was on the streets. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't want to help. The only time I really talked to somebody is if they had drugs that I wanted. And other than that, it's being alone. So now, as I'm working with the people that we have down at the shelter, I see that. I see a lot of people just struggling. They're either just at a point in their life where it's a situational thing. Maybe they're on a fixed income. But then also those that I can relate to that have some mental illness going on, some stuff that's not been addressed, that's been holding them back from getting to where they want to be. I think it's just kind of every person that goes through there is having their own battle. And when you're on the streets, like Pat was saying, there's going to be mental illness. If you're on the streets for any period of time, trauma and mental illness are just part of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the shelters, it's not an ideal situation for most people. Just an example, in the mid shelter, in the main dorm, I have 150 people in a dorm that should probably be holding max capacity, maybe 100. And you have a small little locker that's probably smaller than your high school locker. And we do our best. The gospel mission helps us serve meals at night. But it's just, I would love to be able to come in here one day and say that I lost my job because we don't have any more clientele.
I
That
do
would be my
too.
dream.
Try to therapize myself out of work. I mean, it'd be great if we were all walking around in a community that was totally healthy and we didn't have to see, couples fighting in the grocery line or, kids getting smacked by sticking their fingers in the bins or kids getting bullied on the playground. I mean, if we can eliminate all that, I mean, that's why we have podcasts, right? So we can, people don't have to go seek out formalized resources. They can download this stuff right into their earbuds if they want to stay healthy. What I was going to ask is, it's a little bit controversial, I suppose, but there's articles out there and that talk about how in vogue homelessness has become and how governments are purposely, subsidizing it. And there's, nefarious bad actors who make money off of homelessness. And I'm just wondering what your guys' perspective is, because all this sounds like these people who are struggling in this way aren't choosing it. And yet there's some narratives out there. It's like, well, people get offered help all the time and they reject it. So that sounds like they're choosing to be homeless. And then there's trendy homelessness like we see covered in maybe the Berkeleys and Portlands of the world, or purposely college students will travel there to take advantage of whatever system's in place. How much of that occurs versus how much of it's just sensationalized outliers?
Yeah. So once again, my opinion is I think you have all of that. I definitely come across the individual that we've offered him every resource known to mankind, and they just don't want the help. Mm-hmm. They just don't want it.
Explain that. How's that? That doesn't seem logical. I mean, you're living in misery and you don't want to get out of it.
Some people don't see living along the river in a nice tent, waterfront property, no bills, we do a lot. I can tell you this about our community. That's what I know best. Is we do a lot. We throw a lot of resources at helping our homeless population. Not just I can tell you, just at the shelter alone, our budget's $3.6 million. That's just the shelter alone.
That's a lot of resources.
That's not to mention what Hopes throws at it, what Catholic Charities throws at it, and every other organization, the Eddie House. I can't even imagine if you were to tally all that up. And I'm not saying it's all about money. It's also about all the individuals that are currently working in this field. Mm-hmm. I have 75 alone just at the shelters. And then the county has their what's it called now? They have their whole division of human services, which is enormous, and that's all geared towards helping other people and helping our struggling individuals in our community. So I think as far as us as a community, we do an amazing job at trying to combat this. Can we do better? We can always do better, because obviously we still have people living on the streets. As far as people not wanting, I don't know. There's a host of reasons. You'd have to really dig into someone's life. A lot of this stuff is generational too. It's what they've been taught their whole lives. One thing I do want to talk about is childhood trauma, because it's one of my biggest eye openers at the shelter from being there 5 years. Is I no longer see childhood trauma. I would say plays a role in probably 80% of most of the cases at the shelters. And what I hear on a daily basis, the stories I hear, they'd make your skin crawl. And a lot of times I don't see the 52-year-old big, ugly, unshaven, dirty man. I still see a 3-year-old kid that was raped and molested.
Yep.
And that's who we need to get. And this is just my own way of thinking. Did you have this 52-year-old man that's suffering on the street from mental health? Well, he started off at 3-year-old little Johnny, who got raped and molested at 3 years old, and then little Johnny creates another identity, and now he's known as Johnny and Bob, and little Bob gets raped and molested again at 5 years old, and that just continues throughout his whole life. And so, in order to fix, the big ugly homeless guy, we got to get all the way back down to little Johnny at 3 years old.
Couldn't agree more.
And that's what I mean. Like the work that you do, and the work that all the other counselors and psychiatrists and doctors and psychologists and just the person behind the counter at the homeless shelter. It's a friggin' rough job. It is not easy, and the success rate. I don't know. You probably know that more than I do, but our job at the shelter is to house people, and we do really, really good at that. As far as dealing with mental health issues and other things like that, that's not something we measure down there.
Yeah, it's really tough because you got to poke through the the surface, the veneer, I guess, of the defensiveness of, these people have walked so long down a path of darkness that they've now created almost an identity of hopelessness, and a lot of, and it's not helped any by a narrative that's fed through modern psychotherapy circles that say, schizophrenia can't be fixed. It's like, well, I have some personal testimony that says it can. Yeah. And you guys are personal testaments to, addiction being fixed. And when we try to speak that life into people, if we don't get an open rejection to it, there's a little sliver of hope through, in the crack through which we can crawl that allows us to go into their histories and to help them process that and bring it out. The problem is it's very hard work, as Austin shared. It's the hardest thing.
Exhausting.
It is. It's tiring. And because it's so hard, you need a sufficient set of resources behind you to return to at home so that you can decompress, process, journal without the threats of weather, food not being available, violence if you're not in a good area. So we're talking about, back to Maslow's hierarchy here. When you're working on mental distress or mental illness, that's like at the esteem level, which is like fourth in line on the hierarchy. Below that, you got, in order, from the ground up, basic needs: air, water, food, and then right above that is safety and security. That's your shelter, and then above that, love and belonging. And then we can work on you. And so we're asking folks who are barely scraping by, no socks, cold weather, to try to do deep psychotherapy. It's like, well, no, of course it's not going to work. Yeah. What was up with your watch there? I don't know if anybody could hear that, but it sounded like you were playing.
Just starting to go crazy.
It was like you had a Casio calculator watch from the '80s or something. Like, you doing fractions on that thing?
I'm over here fidgeting with it, and I don't know. It's counting down. I hope it doesn't blow up. That'd be terrible.
So you said something in this last little thing. You said something about we were fixed. Mm-hmm. So do you see addiction as being a disease?
No. I want to make sure that we have language. No, I appreciate it, because I my favorite word in counseling is intentionality. So if you know why you do what you do, you can speak and act with greater purpose and intent. And you get better control over what you do. And so I think language matters. I'm also a language guy, and I don't want to necessarily draw the line between cure and disease model. I think cure can take all sorts of forms. Disease model is one form, and that's one lens through which you can look at it. And that actually even varies from person to person. So some people think that it's in your blood, it's genetic, and we don't have a lot of information to support that theory. There's some ideas out there that say there's genetic predispositions that, if triggered by environmental factors, can lead to a series of events that move one way or another. But then other people say the disease model is something you can catch, which is like it's some like psychological chicken pox that descends from the ether. It's like, my depression is back again. It's like, no, or you're fixating on like sad things. And so I don't want to say that there's like some magic wand or a bean or a pill that you can take, but the idea is that these things are overcomable. And where I get that idea, and I thank you for asking me, because I never really get to opine in this format. I do it in supervision all the time when I'm training people, but I'm glad to share this. So my philosophy is rooted in the studies and the writings of Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a very, very spiritually oriented person, and his model of the human psyche, or as we might know it, the mind or the soul, literally translated from the Greek. Psyche means soul, because Psyche was the goddess of the human soul. There's a divine component to each human psyche. And so if you believe in the divine, if you believe in the God component, and you believe that the divine is unlimited in its capacity, we are also therefore unlimited in our capacity, which means that if you believe in that model, nobody's born broken. You can be born with broken parts of your body, but no broken souls. Therefore, if you're born pure, clean, perfect, I don't want to say perfect, because there's a lot of discussion about pre-existing sin and brokenness and all that stuff, and introjected beliefs. But if you're born mostly whole and then you get broken along the way, we should be able to return you to some sort of whole and functional. So when I say fixed or cured, or that's what I'm talking about, is that there's a light at the end of the metaphorical tunnel that says you're going to be okay as long as you work hard on recovering whatever you're struggling with, whether it's and I don't like the bifurcation of mental